All right, welcome everyone to the Warrior One Project podcast. Tonight, I'm meteorologist Mike Hernandez, and I'm going to be hosting this podcast for you all this evening. I hope you've had a chance to at least hear about this lady who's going to be our guest for tonight. Her name is Dorothy Herrera Niles, and she is very special. She comes to us with a wealth of experience. For instance, she's been a law enforcement professional for 30 plus years with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, that's DHS, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, commonly known as ICE, and then the Legacy Immigration and Naturalization Service, which is INS. So those are just some of the things that she's done in her years working in law enforcement. And Dorothy, welcome. Thank you for joining us. It's such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So I guess what I'd like to, I just kind of touched on some of the things that you've done, with a really broad brush. Could you tell us a little bit more about what you've gotten to do? I mean, it sounds fascinating.
Sure. I started my career in law enforcement with the Immigration and Naturalization Service back in '88. I spent my first 10 years on the U.S.-Mexico border, working at the port of entry in San Ysidro, California, which is the largest land border in the world. So there at the port of entry, you interview persons seeking admission into the United States, interview them, verify they have the proper documents to enter the United States and that they're not bringing contraband into the United States.
And that's just one of the things that you've done. Tell us a little bit about some of the other jobs that you've had, and then we'll talk about how it actually fell into identifying and working with human trafficking issues.
Absolutely. So after working on the U.S.-Mexico border for about 10 years, I took a position within INS in San Juan, Puerto Rico, as a deportation officer. I worked there for 2 years. After working in San Juan, Puerto Rico, I also worked in San Antonio, Texas from about 2000 to 2003. And had oversight of juveniles here, the juveniles, unaccompanied children here that were coming across the US-Mexico border without their parents or family members. After working in San Antonio during that 9/11 era, I went on a detail up to Chicago, where I was selected for a promotion and became a supervisor, and worked detained and non-detained cases, docket work, and worked the streets in Chicago a little bit with my staff, my officers. And from Chicago, moved on to Washington, D.C., and it's just been go, go, go ever since. I took a staff officer position in headquarters, and shortly thereafter moved on to Baltimore as an assistant director for the Baltimore field office for ICE. A couple of years later, I got antsy again and looked to do more on a global scale, and I ran the removals coordination unit, which coordinated all of the commercial removals or deportations from the United States. There were about, I don't know, maybe 13,000 on average deportations that were commercial removals, and many of those were escorted because there were such violent criminals that were being removed. From headquarters, running that unit, the chief position there, I moved on. From there, I did a stint down in El Paso, Texas, where I was an interim director, a field office director at the height of the cartel violence that was spilling over into the United States from Mexico. So I was detailed down there in about 2010 to help stem the flow of some of the violence that was spilling over from the cartels. You may recall movies like Sicario are very vivid pictures or depictions of some of the violence that's not too far from the truth that happened down there in Mexico. When I came back shortly thereafter, I was promoted to an actual field office director position on a more permanent basis. and worked in the Boston field office and had oversight of 6 states, all of New England, and worked with all local, state, and federal partners there. And I don't know if I follow trouble or trouble follows me. You may recall the Boston Marathon bombing
Yes.
that occurred under my watch as the director for ICE enforcement and removal operations. So I deployed over 100 of my officers, men and women, that were ready to stand up to the challenge and help to track down that terrorist for that entire week. And I had 3 fugitive teams in Watertown from sun up to sundown when the younger Tsarnaev brother was taken off the boat. Then eventually I retired. I spent my last 5 years in Baltimore, Maryland, and assisted some of the local agencies during the Freddie Gray riots. That was a very pivotal moment in law enforcement and very challenging, and they're still feeling the effects of some of the things that happened at that time. So in Maryland, we actually had quite a bit of activity, criminal activity, and some of these transnational criminal organizations and violent gang activity in Maryland as well. So you wouldn't think so far from the border, but there's a lot of craziness in the world all over the United States.
Yeah, there is. And when you're talking about human trafficking, you know, because of what you've been exposed to during those years, I'm sure you saw how it works, how it develops, and how it's actually put into operation. Can you tell us a little bit about some of what you saw and maybe how it's structured?
So depending on where you are, there's different facets of the smuggling operation. You know, it's a global problem. It's not a local problem to the U.S.-Mexico border. It's actually global in nature, and it affects, you know, people from all over the world, not just people seeking entry into the United States. But while working on the U.S.-Mexico border, there were many instances where women and children were being smuggled in, and not necessarily with their family members. They were coming to us by way of smugglers with false documents. You could tell they were not familiar with the individuals that they were traveling with. They were very timid, very scared. Some of them were even hidden in some interesting compartments. You know, you open the glove box on the US-Mexico border, you have different search authorities on the US-Mexico border due to national security, and in inspecting vehicles and individuals coming across the US-Mexico border, I remember opening a glove box and seeing a face inside the glove box.
Oh, wow.
I remember in a pickup truck coming to make entry into the United States and stopping for inspection, putting my hand behind the seat of the pickup truck, and I felt a wet, hot face, you know, being smuggled in behind a single cab pickup truck. Probably the most interesting compartment in which we actually found people and not drugs was inside of a portable love seat that was in a conversion van, and they were actually nailed in to the piece of furniture. So people go to great lengths to smuggle people into the United States for a variety of reasons.
So when we're talking human trafficking, though, they can be brought in, like you said, they may be brought in posing as a family, but in reality, you have the handler, and then you have maybe the lady and maybe a child. They may be related, they may not be.
Correct.
So they come across the border. I'm assuming they're organized enough so that they already know where they're going. They have somebody probably ready to pick them up and take them to different destinations. Is that how it works? And where do they go?
In some instances, yes. I mean, there's not one answer for every smuggling situation. In some cases, I guess you have more honest crooks than other ones. They actually do deliver the individuals where they say they're going to their relatives. In other instances, you may have people that are smuggled and not delivered to their loved ones. They may be taken to perform other duties, if you will, whether that's working in a restaurant, working on a farm, just working serious like labor jobs, or possibly in restaurants. Sometimes some of these individuals don't have the fees to pay for their smuggling charge, if you will, and they have to basically serve as indentured servants and work in different capacities, possibly in restaurants. Sometimes some of the women believe that they're going to be nannies or work in childcare, and they end up in prostitution rings.
And that is just one of the aspects. I mean, you mentioned that, and I don't know if people, we think of human trafficking and we think of, okay, the child gets kidnapped and sold to other countries. You think of prostitution, you think of those things, but a lot of times it's almost like an indentured servitude that they're sent to. There's situations where they think they're coming into the country and going to work as a hairdresser and trained in that, and then they find out they're going to be put into prostitution. But there's others where, like you say, they actually have to go and they're sent to places where they work off their actual the cost of bringing them across, right?
Absolutely. So the problem is, in most cases, the persons being trafficked have no relationship with these smugglers. And unfortunately, they're engaging in criminal enterprise, and they're not your upright citizens trying to help somebody out. They're doing it as a business, and they're ruthless. Basically, treat the people like sheep or cattle, and just victimize them all along the way. And that's why illegal immigration is so dangerous. And hopefully, running into January, we have a set of priorities that continue to enforce and uphold the Immigration and Nationality Act.
Gotcha. So if I had to put this into a structure, is it normally run, is human trafficking normally run by cartels between Mexico, as far as between Mexico and the United States, we're talking here?
Absolutely.
Are they the main drive for that?
I would say they're the main drivers. Yeah, they're transnational criminal organizations, and it's a criminal enterprise. It's a global problem, but with respect to the U.S.-Mexico border, many of these individuals are recruited for a better life, so to speak, and may not find what they're hoping for when they engage with these smugglers and these human traffickers.
So is the problem more prevalent in Mexico than it is here? I know you mentioned earlier there's other parts of the world where it's huge. It's a huge problem.
Right. I don't think there's any country that's really immune to the problem. I do believe that the U.S. is very engaged on various levels, the local, state, and federal level, working together to prosecute these individuals engaging in this activity.
I gotcha. Okay, so again, if we as citizens want to do something to help, what can we do? I mean, what is there anything that we can help?
Sure, we can always do more as members of the community. Individuals can serve in a variety of capacity, but probably the simplest thing that people can do is really become aware of what the signs and symptoms are. If you see something, say something. There's actually a couple of telephone numbers that I'm happy to share with you.
Please do.
Yes, so at the Department of Homeland Security, we have what's called a tip line. And at that number, at my former agency before I retired, the tip line number is 866, the letters DHS, the number 2, and then ICE. So if you type in the numbers that relate to 866 DHS, the number 2, You can share information if you have any concerns, if you see anything that looks irregular or suspicious, trust your gut. You could save someone's life, literally. Also, the Blue campaign, where federal, local, and state partners work together. There's also another telephone number there, and that's, let's see, what do we have here? We have 1-888-373-7888. So that might be helpful as well. Always better to err on the side of caution and potentially do a really great thing to save someone from trafficking. Not all trafficking is sex trafficking, like we discussed. Some of it is indentured servitude. The U.S. Department of Labor also engages in some of these cases, but it's really the members of the community that really, have the eyes and ears and see and hear what's going on out there. And if you see something that's not right, it's better to report it and let the officials do their due diligence.
Okay. Dorothy Herrera Niles, I want to thank you for joining us this evening. It's been very interesting, very fascinating. And we could talk to you on all of these subjects. We could do an hour on each one of those, some of the things that you've experienced. But thank you so much for sharing and for spending this evening with us, okay?
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right. And I want to thank everyone for watching. And again, we're going to have another podcast next week on our Warrior One Project podcast, which normally will be on Wednesday or Thursday at 7 p.m. So